What's going on, guys? Uche Joku, sneaker principal, and I want to share a thought that's been permeating in my brain since last night. So, I'm in the beginnings of my doctoral studies. So, I'm taking a class that this summer that just wrapped up last night. We have a couple of two assignments left, but our in-person meetings ended last night. Virtual meetings, of course. And at the end of the course, this course is on supervision. You know, specifically looking at district level supervision. And just background for those of you who are like, what is he talking about? I'm doing my doctoral studies in educational leadership at the University of Rochester, Warner School, my alma mater where I did my undergraduate studies. So it feels good, even though it's virtual. It feels good to be in that space, especially knowing how much University of Rochester meant to my development. All right, back to the topic. At the end of last evening, we had a conversation about supporting new leaders. Developing new leaders, evaluating new leaders, growing new leaders, and also specifically assistant principals. And I know quite a few people who are pursuing their school building leadership licenses here in New York State. I'm not sure what it's called in other places, other states, other localities. But however, one thing I am pretty sure of, because again, I know a lot of people in education, and I've been fortunate to have been connected with people across the country. And for the most part, we're all trained the same. It's the same license to become assistant principal that it is to be a principal, to be a school building leader. And what happens is the courses that you take, the particular standards you have to cover, it doesn't matter what university you go to, at least here in New York State, is the same content. And rarely does it deviate from what's prescribed to get your license. But you have to take an exam, you have to pass that exam, and hopefully your courses are giving you all the information that you need to be able to pass that exam to get your license. And then you do internship hours. You work on some kind of project, and again, this is to get your license. So it doesn't matter whether or not you move from being a teacher to a principal, which has happened, or you go from being a teacher to, or some kind of teacher lead to being an assistant principal on your way to being a principal if you choose to go that pathway. So it's the exact same training, but the job description is very different. Whether you're a principal or you're assistant principal, the job description is very different, and leadership is handled differently from school to school. I was fortunate to have had one particular mentor who literally grabbed me by the wrist and said, "You're coming with me," and exposed me to a lot of things, budgeting, high-level conversations with superintendents, and a lot of leadership stances, a lot of how to lead meetings and departments, and he threw me to the fire. So I learned a lot of things under his tutelage that really supported my development as a school leader. So by the time I became assistant principal, I was already in the heat of things, and I was seeing that a lot of things I was being taught in my program did not necessarily match with the realities of the world, what was actually happening outside. And I say that to say that a lot of aspiring leaders, a lot of assistant principals don't get that same training. Is as if not even as if. The reality is we have a lot of principals out there. What they do, or leaders, is that they treat their teacher leaders or their assistant principals as, how do I put this, as literally assistants. I don't want to do this, I'm going to give this to you. So if it's instruction, if you're strong in instruction and you're really good at what you do instructionally, I don't want to do this, I want to give this to you. Because I don't want to touch instruction. I don't want to touch the classrooms. So you're going to do that. But operations, budgeting, all the other things, the political spaces, you're never exposed to. Or it's the other way around. You have a lot of assistant principals find themselves as overpaid deans. Your job is security, making sure all the fire drills happen, making sure if there's an issue, you're doing suspensions, you meet with parents, because as a principal, I'm doing all the high level things, so I don't get involved in those things. Again, what ends up happening is when the time comes, for an opportunity to lead for an assistant principal, you find yourself with a lot of gaps, a lot of experiential gaps. And that's something we talked about last night. And it had me rethinking and appreciating my mentor, who really pushed me hard. At some point in times, I was so frustrated. I thought to myself, like, this dude is just using and abusing me. He got me doing all this stuff. But I appreciate him now, because there's very little that comes my way that I'm not like, oh, I know how to handle that. Oh, this is what we need to do here, because that was the space he put me in, and I've followed suit with my assistant principals and teacher leaders that worked under me with the same mentality, exposing you and putting you in a position of discomfort so you know how to move. My pride is whenever somebody who used to work for me as a teacher leader or an assistant principal or whatever capacity move into assistant principal jobs, move into principal jobs, because rarely do they ever tell me, oh my God, this is so hard, I didn't know what to do. 99% of the time, they go into a job and they're just like, oh man, it's frustrating. I gotta do this and I gotta do that. I gotta handle this. This happened. And we have conversations about the work itself and not the shock factor of, oh my God, I didn't realize it was going to be like this. And so I say also say it's very important as leaders that we are grooming. The word grooming is used in such a bad way, but in this space, in professional grooming, preparing our subordinates for the possibilities of what's going to happen next. Even those who are choosing not to move on to becoming principals, making them the most effective assistant principal or vice principals. So wherever they are, wherever they're working, they have a total some knowledge of what's happening in the building, so that if they're needed to step into that role, they're not shocked. I think it's something that we have to do better at. But I also put this at the foot of our training programs at the universities. How can that training, that preparation, be a little bit more encompassing? The internship hours, rather than just being a, hey, come up with a program or project with your principal, and ends up being like, hey, I am measuring, I'm collecting data around MTSS and how our ENL students are doing here, or I'm running the after school program, or whatever the case may be. Our assistant principals, our aspiring leaders need actionable experiences, things that they can sink their teeth into and build their toolkit of skill sets, so that they're ready. But the worst thing I've seen is when you have school leaders who walk into school buildings and their first thing in their minds is more decorative. How do I make this place look better? How do I make sure that the ambiance of the school, that's important. But you know what's even more important? How do we attack the mission to make sure that our kids are successful, to make sure that our teachers have everything they need, to make sure that the school is running smoothly and there's no distractions, to make sure the budgeting and the finances and everything is on point. Because I tell leaders, listen, when you take over a school, you become a CEO of a multi-million-dollar company with a staff, with a product to be produced annually. And like any other business, you are judged on the final outcomes of the financial goals, or in this case, the proficiency goals of and outcomes of those students. So I hope this makes sense. I'm here driving and I'm stuck in traffic, and I just wanted to get this out of my brain. It's very important, that our universities, our training programs are better aligned to prepare people to go into assistant principal positions, and also some kind of training when you're ready to move from assistant principal to principal, because you could be in that position as assistant principal for a couple of years and not fully understand what's above the horizon. So if it's an in-service training that's happening from districts that the state says this has to happen before the AP moves into this role, like these things have to happen. You can't just throw people in positions and just be like, hey, because you already have the title or you've been an assistant, you're ready for that. And that happens all the time. And I think that's why we have such a huge revolving door of leadership. People get into the job and they were not ready for it. People get into the job and because they were not ready for it, and they're messing up and they walked out of their buildings. Yeah. All right, y'all. So call to action. Training programs. Let's get better and making sure we're preparing people for the roles that they're going into. District leaders, let's make sure we have in-service programming and supports for our teacher leaders, our assistant principals in preparations for the next step above. And also, let's make sure that our principals, that you guys out here are making sure that you're harnessing the power of distributive leadership to ensure that the people on your team are constantly learning. Those who are saying, I want to do this, don't wait for them to get into their training programs. Start teaching them now. Teaching them. Because I'm going to say this in closing. I said this last night. As a leader, I believe I'm a gatekeeper. I am tasked and privileged to be able to contribute in the development of the next generation of leaders. Making sure that those who come behind me are prepared for the work. And if they're not prepared for the work, it's because we're not doing what we need to do to ensure that preparation. All right, y'all. Uche Njoku, Sneaker Principal. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your summer, the rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all soon. All right? Be well.